Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to our podcast. This summer, we're running a special series of podcasts I'm super excited about. We have our Church and Trauma Summit this fall coming up. It's September 17th from 10 to 2 p.m. at City Impact here in Lincoln. And what we're doing on this series of podcasts is we're interviewing all of our panelists who will be at the Church and Trauma Summit. And today we have a special guest. I'm excited to introduce Trey McGruder. He's going to introduce himself in a minute. But I wanted to encourage you, go to our website. You can go to chne.org/summit to read about all the details and register you and your team. It's just $29 to register, and that even includes Chick-fil-A for lunch. Chick-fil-A is kind enough to sponsor our meal together, and so we're excited to be together September 17th. It's during the workday, and so if you're a pastor, minister, organizational leader, we'd love to have you come. All right, Trey, thanks for joining us, man. I'm so excited for our conversation. Appreciate you being here.
The pleasure is mine.
So, Trey, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you, what you do, kind of what your organization is all about. I'll get to why you're excited to be a part of the summit here in a minute, but just tell us a little bit about you and your professional life.
Well, first and foremost, I want to just say thank you for having me on this podcast today. I am looking forward to the Church and Summit. And I just want to say, like, who doesn't love Chick-fil-A? That's enough to entice anybody to want to attend. So like you said, James, my name is Trey McGruder. I am the CEO and founder of A Blessing and Hope Family Services. And, one of the things that we do is we work with at-risk children and families. And kind of what our approach is, we use what is called a blessing and hope model. And we notice that a lot of families, when they come into the system of working with CPS, that it is a daunting process. There's a lot of different people. And sometimes you can just kind of lose that hope of knowing, like, what is tomorrow going to look like, because there's just so many challenges now that you see. So a lot of our focus is just making sure we hire appropriately the people with the, just correct background and just the right mindset to be able to provide that hope that a lot of families need. But what kind of drew me into this field, I guess, if we can kind of go back to that, A Blessing of Hope has been established. I guess it'll be 3 years as of August 16th. And we had just had tremendous growth. We are a Christian-based agency, so a lot of our values and kind of what we believe are, Christian-based. And for me, it was always a God thing. I always tell people that I didn't really choose this field. The field kind of chose me. And a family support specialist was the first job I had out of college. And it was, I always knew I wanted to do something in the social work field, but I just wasn't sure what. And that was eye-opening for me. I got to, see a lot of challenges that a lot of families in our community face. Also got to see a lot of the wins of what great services and great people can do, when we give families the opportunity to thrive. And what led to A Blessing of Hope, it was around 2020, I guess to be exact, or maybe 2019. I always forget the date. And I was in education at the time. So I was working for Purdue, which is where I got my master's at. And my philosophy was always education. And I was working at the Graduate School of Business for a long time, just helping, students, find their passion and find just the ideal environment where they can thrive. In our thing, the ideal program. And I remember going down the road one day and I'm just praying. I just finished grad school and I'm just saying, God, where do you want me? And for me, that was always the thing, was for God to just put my skills and the things that he blessed me with to help with the betterment of society. And through that prayer, I tell this story to all of our new teammates, is, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, whoa, for the first time, I had we always talk about visions,
Yep.
and you have a vision, and then you just kind of always think like, oh, did you really have a vision? And for that time, it was clear as day. And God had showed me a blessing of hope. He gave me the name. He gave me exactly what I was supposed to do. And through that, it came with a lot of challenges. It took exactly 2 years to get to the point that we're at, or just even get to the starting point. Because, in family service, there's a lot of challenges and hurdles that you have to go through.
Yep.
And there was at one point that I had wanted to give up, and God told me to keep pushing. And then it finally came to fruition in just a short amount of time. We have grown our staff from one team member to now 70
Wow.
in, almost 3 years, not even 3 years yet. And, I just have to give credit and honor to God.
Yeah.
Because, we have a vision, we know what we're doing. And ultimately, what we do here to Blessing and Hope is we just want to glorify Him.
That's awesome.
And one thing I would say about trauma, the reason I'm so excited about, this Church and Trauma Summit is that trauma is a spiritual problem.
Mm-hmm.
And although we try to fix it with a lot of earthly solutions, and I believe you can do both, but you can't leave out the spiritual aspect of it.
100%. Yep. I love it. So you kind of talked about, like, I love what you said, like this field you didn't pick this field picked you. I feel like that's true for anybody, especially if they're a Christian and they're in human services. So what were some of the things, you were in education, and what were some of the things in your life, personally, professionally, that you got to that point where you're like, you prayed that prayer and then you feel like God gave you that vision? Like what led up to that? Were there people? Were there events? Was it your upbringing? Like what were some of those things that got you to the point where you say, yeah, God, I believe you. I should dedicate my life to this.
Mm-hmm. So for me, when I was in education, I loved it, but I just always kind of felt this tug in my heart that God was telling me that I need to do more. And, the thing about me is I never liked being comfortable, right? I love the process of being uncomfortable, because through that, it's growth, right? Yep. And it gives us the opportunity for God to use us and put us in situations that can glorify Him.
Yep.
So what led up to that point, I just kind of remember working, and, I just kind of had this feeling like, God, I know I can do more for you. And I don't know exactly what that is. If that's me going out and, feeding the homeless with what I have, or just doing more in my church, let me know that.
Yep.
Just so I can have that guidance and making sure that you can fully get the glory from the things you have given me. And, through that, like I said, just kind of what led up to that prayer. I was driving, and one thing that I am always in the habit of is I like to pray when I drive. It just kind of something that clears my head a little bit. Sure. And as I was saying that prayer, God was showing me something. And what led up to that vision, I knew that, this was a God thing, because had it not been, I guess I'm not sure, but I think I would probably still be in education, because I loved it. I love working with students, but I also love, what I do now in working with, our most vulnerable population, and just making sure we can tailor our services to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
Just kind of have that Christian-based perspective.
Yeah. Cool. I love it. All right. Here, want to spend a lot of our time on this and talking about the summit. When you hear the words church and trauma together, what comes to mind from your perspective?
What comes to mind for me is community. The reason I love those two together is because the church was always meant to be the place for the most vulnerable. A place, we walk into the hospital all the time, right?
Yep.
And nobody's shocked when you hear somebody cough, because you're like, this is the hospital. It's for sick people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where church comes into play. When you are going through spiritual battles, then the church and that community and that prayer and that thanksgiving and that togetherness is what ultimately leads to better healing. Now, I'm not saying you can't have one of the, I think both can exist.
Yep.
Obviously, God
Yep.
uses people, but I like that because it helps the church just understand where we lie in helping people with trauma,
Yeah.
and what can we do, and where do some of the values that we can bring with helping our population succeed more in terms of trauma.
I love that. Of course, I mean, Jesus painted that picture with, saying, I came for the sick,
Mm.
not those who are well. What do you like? I think you'd agree with me when I say, that the church is just notoriously, we've dragged behind the world in terms of understanding trauma. I mean, Trey and I met probably a year or so ago, and we met at a Panera and we were chatting. And I told you, like, I used to be a pastor. I was in ministry, but I didn't get training on this.
No.
Like, I didn't take a class in seminary on trauma. And what do you do when a family comes into your congregation? Somebody has been in foster care, or one of the parents have been incarcerated, but they are curious about spiritual things. Like, you have to relate to them differently than, and not bad way, not in a wrong way, but you have to relate to them differently than the family that like grew up and went to church and had a great upbringing and relatively little trauma in their lives. And so but I didn't learn that. I didn't learn how to care for those people, communicate with them. Like, what do you think it is that has held the church back from really engaging vulnerable people, being compassionate, being empathetic, welcoming them in? Like, what are some of the obstacles that you've seen just in your own experience, your own life?
Yeah, that's a good point. And for me personally, I think the things that held us back the most is being able to see things through everybody's lens. We have different denominations all across the world. And, denominations, what I always say, are man-made. God, when we get to heaven, God is not going to ask me if I was Baptist, if I was, whatever.
Yep.
It's going to ask me about the main point. And I just think that when you kind of have those different denominations, people tend to have sometimes different viewpoints. And not saying that, I'm not trying to lay the picture of, people are thinking differently of that's not what I'm saying. It just, with trauma, one thing that we are really trying to do, even through our intensive family preservation program, is to make sure that people are more trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is when you're not trauma informed, you tend not to understand the things that come out of trauma, the reason people act the way they do, the reason people say the things they may say.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand that background. If I grew up in
Okay.
a certain particular situation, then that's kind of how my lens is developed based off my upbringing, the things that I experience. But for the church to really understand trauma, then you kind of have to take a step out of that lens and say, hey, I understand that the results and things that happen may be out of my scope, but I'm willing to, kind of take a step back, really invest in learning and growing to understand how I can be of service to people that maybe have went through things that I don't understand.
Yep.
And I just think that, as people, I mean, not just in the church, as people in general, we have to do that.
Yeah.
And I just think the church, most importantly, we have to kind of look in the mirror and say, like, how can we be more of service? How can we be more welcome and invite people to open up about some of the challenges they had, so we can be that brotherhood or be that sisterhood or be those people that can just provide that community to our most vulnerable.
That's so good. So I'm going to make a statement and I want to see what you think. I think sometimes as Christians, we want to be right more than we want to be loving and empathetic.
Yep.
Have you experienced that?
Oh, absolutely.
As I just think like we just tend toward belief and formal doctrine, kind of the denominational lines you were talking about, like who's right, does the Bible, say that precisely. And then we neglect what Jesus talks about, I think, is like the weightier matters of the law, right? Love, justice, mercy.
Yep.
But you're really worried about, did I tithe the right amount? It's like, but did you love that person? Did you welcome them in? Were you compassionate? Did you look at them in the eye and say, how are you doing? Can I help you today? Like, I just think that we get so concerned about, and I'm not saying, and you're not saying like, oh, like our beliefs don't matter. Of course they matter. But, we can say, Lord, Lord, I knew you. And Jesus is like, you didn't really know me.
Yeah.
Because you didn't show that you loved me by the way that you treated people and the way that you welcome them. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, how do you train your staff? I'm 70 people, maybe not, they probably come from different walks of life. Maybe not all of them are Christians. How do you guys go about training your staff to really buy in to kind of a holistic, spiritual, emotional, physical, psychological, view of, we're here to help people. So how do you guys go about training your staff to have that vision?
Yeah. One thing that I always preach to our staff is, one of our core values is inspirational. And I'm always saying that in order to inspire somebody else, you have to be inspired by something, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we always do at our staff, when they come and start, first in the interview process, we just kind of make sure that they know what they're getting into, knowing that, hey, this is a Christian-based agency. We may do things a little differently from how you grew up. But we're always open to kind of telling our service to just meet everybody and bring in different ideas, because we just don't believe one idea is one, the one all be all.
Yep.
So, one of the things that we do is we always start with our vision and our mission, and just really making sure that people are aligned, through our own personal testimonies to the mission and kind of what we're trying to achieve in our communities. And then we really show people a picture of how they fit into that mold. And, if you don't see yourself in that model, then, we always say there's probably another agency out there for you. But we have a model of the things that we want to do in our community. And we want God ultimately to get the glory in everything that we do here.
I love that.
That has helped, even just through us in our new intensive family preservation program. We've been teaching that same thing. And a lot of that is geared towards trauma. I talk a lot about trauma. We talk a lot about just being a seed-based organization. And what we say is that, farming teaches us a lot about life. We know if I get a good seed, I plant it in good soil, I water it daily, and I'm a good steward of that seed, then I know it's going to grow great fruits. And I know those fruits are going to be able to bless a lot of other people. Yeah. And that's kind of how we see it with trauma. There's people that have different backgrounds, different views, different feelings, different experiences, which the Bible tells us that we are going to go through trials and tribulations. Yep. The Bible has plenty of stories about people experiencing trauma.
Oh my gosh.
Right. It's a lot.
Yep.
And we know the Bible teaches us to, or I guess always say, that so often in society, we, try to solve spiritual problems with just only earthly solutions. Yeah. And you have to have a mixture of both. Yep. And that's kind of what we try to preach our staff daily.
I love it. So I want to ask you about this, and I did prep Trey for this question because I know it can get this question can get kind of hairy. Mm-hmm. Without getting into specifics or details, what's been your history in the church in interacting with trauma? Meaning, like, have you had any experiences within church settings that have really shaped your understanding of trauma? Have you seen handling of trauma done poorly? And then kind of how did that impact you? I mean, it could be anything from religious abuse to dealing with divorce care, loss of a child. I mean, anything. I don't know what, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but what kind of experiences in the church have helped you understand and see trauma through a Christ-centered lens?
Well, I guess to answer the question, we first have to say that the church has created a lot of trauma for people. And
Unfortunately,
some people, a lot of, I guess some of the people I spoke to in my past, even through my church, they don't go to church today because of that trauma and because of their triggers and things like that. So, I always say, and I always got to be careful with this question because people can kind of take things out of context.
Yeah, I was careful what I thought about. Should I ask this question? But I need to ask it. I need to ask it.
You have to be careful because it just things can be so easily taken out of context. I just think in some churches, I'm not saying all, we just kind of have this viewpoint is my way is the only way and my way is the best way. And the thing that we always have to make sure we're doing is that we're rooted in doing it God's way. I say this plenty of times, denominations are man-made. We have different denominations because people had a different viewpoint of what they thought was right, and they want to do it that way. And now we have a lot of options when it comes to church, right? And with that, then that means people in the way they bring, the way they believe are breaking off. So now when you have somebody come in that sometimes don't fit that model, sometimes it can create the trauma of them being an outsider. And when,
and especially if they've been an outsider their whole life, and they come into a place where they feel like should be safe.
Exactly. And when the church, because sometimes when people come to church, they come looking for community. They have probably reached a point where things have gone so bad where they're like, you know what? I have to give God a try. I have to just see if this can work. And, the thing that I always tell people, if you have a non-believer, you can't go give them scripture. You can't go give them the Bible. They don't believe. But one of the things that you have to do is tell them your personal testimony and tell them how God, what he did for you. And that can just kind of get them curious. But then when they come to church, we have to do a better job of, taking the denomination out of it, taking the way we do things out of it. And from a biblical perspective and from a Christ-based perspective, how can we meet you where you're at and be that community that you need to be able to get to a place in life where you feel self-sustained through Jesus Christ.
I love that, what you just said. Like, it's like telling someone a Bible verse isn't an evil thing, but like, what's the most helpful thing in the moment? And like, they don't speak that language. That's not their world, but love and care and compassion and empathy, like everybody understands that language. Nobody's like, oh, this is confusing to me. Like, but the Bible in the moment, that just might not hit them. And it's not like, somebody might hear this and go, oh, are you saying God's word isn't powerful? And like, no, that's not it. But like, it's kind of like being a good missionary. This is, now the conversation is, we're probably opening up a can of worms, but when you go to a people group overseas and they've never had scripture, like what's going to connect with their heart? So like, I think that's just what you're saying, trying to summarize what you're saying is like, what's going to connect with their heart in the moment? And I love it. Like, share your story with them, share God's grace in your life. And that might open up their eyes to, what, there might be hope for me too. I love Absolutely. That. So Trey, let's kind of double click on that. When you think about what your organization can do in partnership with the church, because you guys, through your services, you mostly are working with DHHS, right? That's kind of your main partner. But as you think about partnering with the church, how does an organization like yours, maybe not you specifically, but how can an organization like yours help the broader church to really get in the game? I'll just leave it at that. Any thoughts that way?
Awareness and education. That has always been the blueprint for growth, right? Anytime there's an issue, you have to bring awareness. And then with that awareness, you have to bring education. And, our mission, one of our goals for 24 was to be more impactful. And that is to make more families in the DHHS system and just in general more trauma informed. And once you make people more trauma informed, then they start having an understanding of these different things. In my personal life, before I understood trauma, I saw things differently. So it's no fault to the people in the church. After my experiences and seeing this and studying trauma, my lens is a tad bit different on some things than it was when I did not have that training and that education. So our collaboration, that again just goes back to awareness and education.
That's
And
great.
making sure that people, just have an understanding of what even some of these things look like. You may not even, because you can't see trauma. I always give the analogy that trauma is like this wound I have on my arm, and then I cover it up so nobody can see it, but people may come around and hit my arm, and I may say, ouch, and they may not understand, like, what's hurting you. I don't not see a wound on you, but they can't see it because my shirt is covering it up.
Yep.
So it's not visible at that point.
Yep.
That's the same thing with the relationship with organization and churches. It's just doing what we can to make sure people understand and are more informed. That way they can see what some of that stuff look like, and they can be of more services to people that have those different, battles they're going through.
That's great. I love that analogy. And I think at the end of the day, it's like people in the church, we just need to be humble enough to say, I don't know everything. And I don't think the Bible answers every single one of my questions about life. So I'm going to be willing to submit myself to learn and grow, and maybe get uncomfortable. You talk about being uncomfortable. Like maybe I'm going to take this class, or I'm going to watch this video or this podcast, or I'm going to volunteer for a day and learn and just say, I don't know all the answers, especially about trauma. I think like I had a pretty good upbringing. Everybody has trauma in their life. It's just a matter of like where it's at on the spectrum, right? But like I had great parents. I wasn't abused or neglected. And so coming into this field, when I became a child protection services investigator, it's like, oh my goodness, like I had to unlearn so much before I could even learn to help, and serve people and show them compassion. So I just love that part of it.
Absolutely. And if I can say one other thing too, if I may, we also can understand how the devil uses trauma. This is why it is a spiritual problem. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God had came through with the Bible saying the cool of the day. And, they recognized they were naked, so they hid. And God had, asked them, who told you? And who told you is a very powerful word, because obviously God knew who told him. He's a creator. But what he wanted them to understand is that their feelings and their thoughts were not their own. And that is the same thing when it comes to trauma. The devil uses trauma so bad. He tells us, you think about even the suicide rates. When you get to a point, the devil is constantly telling you the things to your demise, like you are not good enough, you are not worthy. These experiences just
no one loves you, no one wants you. Yep.
Nobody loves you, nobody cares about you. And in those moments, kind of what we always tell our people, you got to tell yourself who told you. And you have to know that those thoughts don't come from God, so they're from the enemy.
Yep.
And that's why the church is so
100%.
important in this whole trauma thing, because the devil is constantly telling these people that you are not worthy. And if you don't have any type of community, you don't have any type of just somebody telling you the right things, then what's going to happen is you are going to believe that. And that's why
you're vulnerable. Yep.
So important. So people can know that, hey, I know these feelings and thoughts are not my own. I know what the devil's trying to do here. And that's just why the spirituality piece is so important.
That's great. Yeah. And the church has to be that connection piece, because I think there's a reason why in the New Testament we're called the body of Christ. We're part of him. We are his hands and feet and eyes and even mouth sometimes. We can hug and speak truth into someone's life, and we have to be that answer in that moment when somebody doesn't feel loved or worthy.
Absolutely.
And I do think, we've talked about this in other contexts, Christian heritage, with some others and on this podcast too, where we've said, sometimes our own doctrine or theology gets in the way of loving. And we talk about, yes, we're broken, we're sinful, but sometimes that can turn into you're not worthy, you're not lovable, you're so sinful, you're ugly. And it's like, but that's like, I saw this quote this weekend on social media and I loved it. It was like, Jesus didn't die so that God would love you. He died to prove God loves you. And I love that. It's like God pursues you and he comes to you and he wants you. That's the whole point of the gospel. Not that, well, you're so ugly and wretched and who would ever want you? And certainly not God. No, he loves you and he wants you. But the way that most people experience that is through the community of the church. It's through other people. And that's what we're all about. I know that's what you guys are all about. And that's that's essentially what the Church and Trauma Summit is all about, is how do we, as a community of faith here in Lincoln, here in Nebraska, how do we show that in our churches and to the people, in our communities? So I'm going to leave you with this question and we'll end here. What excites you the most? I know you're a visionary guy. So when we think about a big vision for the church in Nebraska, specifically in Lincoln where you work, what excites you most about an event like this?
I think the growth. I think it's going to be a lot of opportunity for people to kind of step out their lens, maybe hear some personal stories of just kind of what the panelists have went through and things through, our lenses. But it's going to be an opportunity just to see things differently. And then to really ask yourself the question, have I been doing everything that I can do to be of service to people in our community that's dealing with trauma?
Yeah.
And just that alone just gets me really excited, because I think after this, after people hear their stories, after people hear a different perspective, then that growth process can start. But it doesn't end there. I think it's just the beginning.
That's great.
Because then after that, then you have to kind of have that personal accountability from that standpoint to kind of go and educate yourself and to begin your growth process of just being the person that God wants you to be.
Yeah. How do you build on it? I love it. All right. Well, we're going to end with that. I know we could probably go on for a lot longer. I'm looking forward to having you at the summit. Thanks for being willing to be on the panel. I think you're going to benefit a lot from Trey and the others who are on those panels. Again, you can sign up at the website. If you're watching this podcast, the URL is here at the bottom, chne.org/summit. You can go there, get all the details. You can read about our panelists and kind of what you have to look forward to during that day. And you can register on that website as well. So Trey, thanks for joining us, man. This has been so good. Appreciate your time.
Likewise. Well, thank you guys for having me, and we're looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks.